So it may come as a surprise that Claude Shannon's PhD thesis was in population genetics, but it is true. The title was An Algebra for Theoretical Genetics, and it was concerned with the evolution of genotype frequencies in a randomly mating population. So Shannon's master's work was much more influential than his PhD. So I don't know if there's any other scientist for whom that can be said. After showing in his 1938 master's thesis how Boolean algebra could be used to analyse electrical circuits, his 1940 PhD thesis was motivated by a desire to produce a similarly revolutionary algebra for genetics. So you might have noticed only 2 years separate the two theses, 1938 and 1940. In fact, Shannon spent only a few months on his PhD thesis. It's a mere 70 pages. It was never published, and to be brutally honest, it's had little or no impact on population genetics. So according to Google Scholar, it's been cited 37 times. Compare that to the paper based on his master's work, cited over 1,000 times. And Shannon himself lost interest in his genetic algebra. Immediately after receiving his PhD from MIT, he went to work at Bell Telephone Laboratories, where he developed his theory of communication. He never worked in genetics again. Nevertheless, it is a creative, novel, interesting PhD. So the main conceptual innovation was a way of representing the genetic composition of populations in mathematical terms. So here's a fragment of his thesis. So this is what a PhD thesis looked like in 1940, written with a typewriter and with gaps left where equations were filled in by hand. This term here, lambda Hij, represents the proportion of a particular genotype in a population. So this represents two loci, so two places where genes can occur, if you like. And you might be aware that you get one copy of each gene from your mother and one from your father. So there are two indices corresponding to each gene or locus. So if, for example, you could have one of three variants at this first locus, H represents the one you got from one parent, J represents the one you got for the other. And lambda Hij is the proportion of the total population that has that particular combination of those four positions for the two loci. Okay, he also defined a cross product. This gives the probabilities of each of the possible genotypes for the offspring of one parent selected at random from one population and the other parent selected from the other. Well, that's roughly the idea anyway. That's defined for two loci, so two genes if you like. This is for three, and the definition can be expanded for more loci, but it gets increasingly lengthy. Okay, so the main result of his thesis gives the genotype composition of a population after n generations of random mating, so starting from a defined initial population. So the initial population here is lambda, mu is the genotype proportions after n random mating generations. That's given for three loci. It could be extended, but again gets very lengthy. So some of the later theorems in the PhD could lead to significant new research. So for example, in two short chapters, he investigated the effect of selective action, so natural selection, on the evolution of a population, and he also proposed a calculus of populations for evaluating time derivatives of genotype frequencies. So overall, the thesis opens up a new mathematical approach in population genetics, but it hasn't been taken up in the way that his other contributions have. That could still change. Perhaps his genetic algebra is just waiting for the right person to come along and pick up where he left off.